So we got labor supply. Let's link it up with labor demand, as we need to do. You can't make much sense of supply if you don't also have demand. So labor demand is the exact same idea as a demand curve in general. At a given wage, how much work do you want to hire people to do? Right? So given the current wage, how much are you willing to hire people to do? And so we can ask, how much are they going to want to do it? And also, how are they going to go about making the decision of who to hire? This is actually going to turn out to be quite different from how we used to think of demand. So how are we thinking about demand and supply before? We think about what went into supply and demand. Well, on the demand side, we used to say, well, it's about preferences. We see what shifts about preferences and what they need and these substitute goods, and et cetera. And I didn't really give you a way of, mathematically at least building it up. But on the supply side, I totally did, right? I said, here's how a production process works. Here's the math of production. Here's how you maximize profit. And from that profit maximization attempt, we end up with a supply curve, right? That's what we had before. But we've switched the roles of the producers and consumers, right? Now the profit maximizing businesses are the consumers. So we can figure out where labor demand comes from by using that same profit maximizing price that we had before. It's just now, instead of deciding how much to produce, they are deciding how many people to hire. So we're going to be able to use the same profit maximizing ideas that we had to figure out what labor demand is going to look like. So what do we have? We have the wage, W, whatever that happens to be set by the competitive market. We have the price of the good that's being sold. So imagine a company here that is producing and selling a good, and they need to hire people in order to make that good. And that's the sort of idea that we're looking at here. You want to make a product, you got to hire people to work for you, and they will help you make the product. And so you have to think, how much do I have to pay that person? Once they make stuff for me, what can I sell it for? And then here's the new term, the marginal product of labor. That's our new term, MPL, marginal product of labor. And what that is if you hire the person, how much more stuff will they make for you that you can then sell? That's what the marginal product of labor is. It's marginal because you're talking about hiring one more person. It's the marginal product because you're talking about how much more you will produce because you hired them. And it's the marginal product of labor because you're talking about hiring a person. Okay. From these, we're going to be able to figure out what labor demand looks like by just thinking back to our profit maximizing principles. So for an employer, it will always be worth it to hire another worker if the value that that person brings you is more than you have to pay them. Pretty straightforward, right? If you hire somebody and they improve your profits by more than you had to pay the person, then it was worth it for you to hire that person. If not, if they brought you less in profits than you're paying them, then it was not worth it to hire that person. That's the logic going on. So here's what we end up with. Keep hiring workers as long as the amount that they bring you, which is price times the marginal product of labor, is more than you have to pay them, the wage. What's this here? Price times the marginal product of labor. That is how much additional stuff they make for you times how much you sell each of those things for. So the logic works out easiest here if you're thinking about like a factory. It still works if you're talking about other kinds of stuff, but it's easiest to think about a factory. Like you run a lamp factory. You make 1 million lamps a day. If you hire another person, it'll help you move a little bit faster, and suddenly you will make 1,000,001,000 lamps a day. Well, that additional worker helped you make 1,000 extra lamps. You sold each of those lamps for $5. I don't know. So they have brought you $5,000 a day in value. As long as you're paying them less than $5,000 a day, then hiring that person was worth it. So it's going to keep being worth it to hire people as long as what they're bringing you, price times the marginal product of labor, is more than you have to pay them. So you're going to keep hiring them more and more and more until we find the golden rule, which is that price times the marginal product of labor is equal to the wage. So the last person you hire should bring you exactly as much additional profit as you are paying them. So let's do a quick example. All right, so the market has determined, based on labor supply and labor demand, here's labor supply, here's labor demand, LW, here's our equilibrium, just as we would find with some regular old supply and demand. It just so happens that right now this is 40. I don't know what good we're selling, but we can sell it for $20 each. And every person that we hire is going to bring us 20 minus L in additional units that we can sell. Right? So the first person we hire is going to make us 19 additional units beyond what we already have. The second person will make us 18. The a third will make it 17, and so on. So how many people should we hire? Well, step number one, we're going to want to find the marginal benefit of hiring, which is going to be what that person brings into us in terms of revenue. So what's that going to be? Well, every time we hire a person, the elf person that we hire makes this many additional units for us, and we can sell each of those units for 20. So the marginal benefit is always going to be the price of the good that we sell times the marginal product of labor, which here is 20 times 20 minus L. Second, we're going to set marginal benefit equals marginal cost. We want to follow the golden rule, as we always do. The marginal cost, what we have to pay in order to hire another person, is 40. So we have the marginal benefit, we have the marginal cost. We want 20 times 20 minus L equal the wage, which is 40. And then finally, we can solve for L, which is going to be the optimal number of people to hire. The number of people we can hire, for which any fewer, we'd be leaving some money on the table. Any more, we'd be hiring too many people. So we can solve this out, divide both sides by 20. We get 20 minus L equals 2, and L equals 18. So the optimal number of people to hire here is 18. Is that right? Yeah. So what is this actually doing? When we solve this math problem, what is it doing for us? Well, it's giving us a way to take the wage and compare it to how valuable the labor is that we're hiring. And so we can translate the wage that we are being charged, basically, into an amount of labor that we want to demand. So there's a relationship between price and quantity demanded. In other words, it is a demand curve. This is the demand curve for labor. We write this out, right? This exact same step out, but without plugging anything in, we get wage equals price times the marginal productivity of labor. This is labor demand. Price of labor, we want to set it equal to the basically marginal benefit that we get from hiring people. This is a demand curve, and the place where the quantity is hiding is inside the marginal productivity of labor. The more people we hire, the less additional value we get from each additional person. Things get crowded, we get overextended, whatever. So that's how we can derive our demand curve from the concept of profit maximization. As firms attempt to maximize their profits, that will determine how much they want to hire based on whatever the wage happens to be.